Next level on the ABXY podcast with Ziad, we have Karim Sadiq, the CEO and founder of Yalla Play. In this episode, we'll learn more about Karim's journey, why he started Yalla Play, where he started Yalla Play, his take on how to grow an ecosystem in the MENA region, as well as some advice for new entrepreneurs and VCs in gaming. Karim, welcome to the ABXY podcast with Ziad. I'm really happy to have you.
Likewise, thank you for having me.
First, Karim, tell me more about your journey. How did you get into gaming in the first place? Why did you choose the business of gaming? And what was the idea behind starting Yalla Play?
Absolutely. So that's the origin story. So I'll try to keep it short. But essentially, my background was in high technology. So I used to work at Dell Computers when I was doing architecture for companies like Facebook, Amazon, and Dropbox, just building out their architectures and very focused on high scalability items. So I've always been in technology. And then we shifted and I started Yalla Play. Bit of a pivot in my career. It was initially an AI company. So we saw a problem in gaming in terms of AI for games, and we wanted to build a back-end AI architecture for games that scales. So we're very focused on scalability component. So we built this AI for a game called Tarneeb. So it was the era where DeepMind got acquired by Google, and they're doing really cool stuff and building very, very smart chess players. So we built a very smart, took us about 8 months to build this really smart AI player for Tarneeb. And we launched it on a website called Tarneeb.com, and that got a lot of traction. We had over 200,000 users. It was growing. And at that point, we weren't really a company. We were just a cool, fun AI project. And we were very excited by our AI, but then we learned something a bit profound in the sense that it wasn't actually fun playing against a very smart AI player. So people were just losing left and right. This thing was defeating everyone, and only a small cohort of users were having fun playing against a smart AI. And we noticed that by making this AI intentionally lose, people had a bit more fun. And this is when the company was born, because we realized a fun AI is an AI that wins at the right time and loses at the right time. And the question was, what's the optimal win rate of an AI to create engagement? So that was Yalla Play back in the day when it first started.
So you told me it got acquired by Google?
No, DeepMind.
DeepMind. I was like, okay.
Yeah, no.
Okay, cool. So, and then it was a web game, right?
Yes,
you told me
we were on the website, Tarneeb.com, Flash-based. This is 8 years ago. So it was like back in the day.
Multiplayer, but you had AIs.
Yes, okay. It was multiplayer. You can play with your friends, or you can play against this AI we called Theta.
Okay.
And we actually sold Theta. So you get your credit card and you paid money and you could buy different levels of Theta. So we had like Theta Basic, and then I forgot the name, but like a super advanced Theta. That's like our best AI possible. And obviously only players who were, very hardcore Tarneeb players would actually purchase that $20 AI. But that was it. It was a very simple model back then. And again, we weren't a real company back then. But then we attracted VCs. Once we started thinking more about the gaming industry and how our AI can be adopted and scaled, and how can we build AI not just for fun, but also tweaked for retention, later monetization. And we raised VC funding, and that's when I realized, okay, we have a company here. And we started in Austin, Texas. So that's where I used to live.
Okay.
Spent about 20-something years there. That's where I worked at Dell Computers at. And our team was all in Austin. And then I met the CTO, and we expanded to Brazil because he is Brazilian.
Yeah, cool. So step back. How did you come up with the idea to develop the AI for Tarneeb? Like, why did you you went at Dell?
Yeah.
And
okay.
What happened?
That's a good question. So, I mean, very simply, I met a few friends. And we used to play Tarneeb all the time.
Okay.
And
in the US.
In the US, and I'd like to think I'm a good player, but I sucked at Tarneeb. And I found out that the reason I sucked at the game was just because of memory, and I needed a little helper. So I literally wrote a little macro tool that would bring with me to these games, and I would like input the data, and then like it would be kind of an aid to play Tarneeb. Everyone called it cheating, but that's kind of how the thing started, and then that evolved into a true player. And one important thing about the website, our goal back then was to develop AI. So we need a lot of training data. So that website served as a portal for training data. And we had like over 1 million Tarneeb games clocked on that website. So that's what allowed us to build this model. And then that was really very early on, like before, we weren't even called Yalla Play back then. So it was a different name. Tarnib, Ultimate Tarnib or something like that. So
The company, you mean?
the project.
Okay, the project.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. And then you attracted VC funding from the US, I guess.
We met them in the US, but we actually raised from the region. So our very first seed investment was from the region.
Mm-hmm.
And that was very exciting for us. In a way, it was a double-edged sword. We were based in Austin, but we raised from the region. So, and it was an interesting proposition because the region was still very, very young. So there was no such thing as gaming in the region. So I'm talking about, UAE, Lebanon, especially Saudi. It didn't exist. So we were very, very early in that stage. But again, we didn't market ourselves as a gaming company. We marketed ourselves as an AI play serving gaming industry.
So the game was a tool for you to actually
the game was a tool.
Yeah,
The game was a tool.
and you told me your CTO was based in Brazil.
Yep.
So I guess from day one you were like a remote company, like you operated in a remote way.
CTO joined us a couple of years later.
Okay.
So we were in Austin, 100%, and then we expanded to Brazil. And then most of the development naturally shifted to Brazil because US is super expensive.
Yeah.
Except for core architecture, initially was in the US, and then game development was happening mostly in Brazil. And then we started expanding internationally because we realized, at least in the gaming space, you're always trying to attract the best talent regardless of where they're sitting. So we had that luxury and we started, expanding internationally. And then COVID hits. And then we realized, oh, great, we were not affected because everyone's all over the place anyways. But we always built this company from the grounds up to be operating extremely efficiently, whether remote or local. So the way we're set up, we were using Slack, our online systems, our tools, our documentation. Everything was really built as a proper engineer organization where you can operate in silos. And whether those silos are local or they're abroad, it worked out well.
Okay, and you attracted this VC funding. What was the purpose of that? So why did you raise to build on the momentum, to build new games? What was the point of raising at the time?
Yeah, VC funding was to shift to mobile.
Okay.
We were a website.
Okay.
Exactly. We were a website, and monetizing a website back then was very difficult, and we weren't depending on ad revenue. So it was essentially build mobile, and most importantly, continue building out our backend architecture because the company's IP is all in this backend architecture. It's all in this monetization, AI-driven backend multiplayer engine.
Cool. By the way, how did you used to monetize on the web? Like, was it ads also?
No, credit cards, literally credit card, and you pay $20 to buy.
Oh, it was a premium game.
It was a premium game.
Okay.
No, the game was free. But if you wanted to purchase the smart AI, you had to pay. Yep.
Interesting. Okay, cool. And at the time, you're telling me that you actually raised from the region, which is interesting. You were early, like gaming wasn't even. It was a bit. There was presence, but it wasn't as it is today. What were the challenges that you faced at the time?
I think our biggest challenges was just fundraising initially. So every time we have to go fundraise, and we've raised 3 rounds. So every time I had to go fundraising, I felt that I had to kind of explain what gaming is.
Yeah.
Right. So
it's my case as well.
I literally had my pitch deck. I don't know why I thought that the closest resemblance of a gaming model was SaaS models. So my pitch deck was like a SaaS pitch deck. I was talking about CAC and LTV, and I mean the ratios were completely off, but that was my pitch deck, and it worked because we were able to raise funding, and we were lucky because we always had traction. So we had that in our favor, but the model and the evaluations and the revenues and Kareem, how does that even work? That was the first challenge. The second challenge is the stigma around gaming being a very hit-driven business.
Yeah,
which is true, right? It's a hit-driven business, which means some games make
sense. That's true.
Yeah,
it's not like the movie business.
Exactly.
We have that. There's some data that we base our decisions on that we can, we can improve on our games through that data. It's live data, like as opposed to like for the film industry, for example.
100%. You're absolutely right. So it looks like we face the same challenges. So I also had to really sell the fact that we're not a hit-driven business. We are going after, solid game loops, existing communities, existing users. We're not reinventing the wheel here. We're not trying to build the next Angry Birds. And that was the other thing. It was all the eyes were on the unicorn games, like your Angry Birds, your Candy Crush. And then they would say, Kareem, so what guarantees do you have that you're going to build the next Candy Crush? I was like, I'm not trying to build the next Candy Crush. So, but yeah, that's bringing a lot of nostalgia because now the industry is a lot different. So.
But has fundraising changed for you? I mean, at the time you told me like fundraising was one of the biggest challenges.
Yep.
Is it still the case today, or is it like it has become easier, or is there less educating to do with the investors? How do you see this?
I think our story changed the most. So now we're a lot bigger of a company than we were before. So now our shift in the fundraising cycle is away from seed. It's more towards like PE actually. But so that's different. And that lends itself to you talking to more international players than local players. But when I do speak to local gaming VCs, or like local VCs, not that many gaming VCs, probably one or two I can mention. When I speak to local VCs, yes, the challenge is still there. I have to
educate.
Exactly. I have to like, pitch deck V2.
I actually have two pitch decks.
One for you local.
VCs,
which is honestly, I enjoy doing. I honestly enjoy, because again, VCs are extremely intelligent and wise in how they make investment decisions. I mean, that's their job. So my job is to convert our company into a model that they can understand, and in their ratios and their risk appetite, because they need to be able to gauge the risk appetite, right? So that's, I enjoy doing this, so I don't mind this fact. And there's something cool also about educating a VC. All right, guys, let me tell you how to make money. But yeah, I think it does make it a bit difficult, and I feel that when we travel to London or Turkey or the US,
definitely,
and I do there, I almost have to like, okay, don't insult these guys.
V1, go back to V1.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, so that's something we have to, maybe an extra hat that we have to wear when you're fundraising here.
Cool. So you worked on the Turnip game, and then you raised around. By the way, I'm curious about why. I mean, if it was your intention in the first place, but were you able to raise from the US or from Latin America, for example, if your team was based in Brazil, or like was it not on your agenda in the first place? Why did you choose the region, or why were you able to raise from the region as opposed to the others? I'm trying to understand the difference in the ecosystems in gaming as well as in like normal traditional VCs. I mean,
that's a great question, and unfortunately, the answer isn't very sophisticated. It's how it happens. So in the region, I mean, I have connections with the region. My family's been here. My parents were here. So on a visit here, approached some VCs, and we got connected to them in the US anyway. So it just worked out that way. And number two, we had this game called Tarnib, which is a Middle Eastern game, even though we're based in the US, and that got really popular. I mean, we had 500,000 fans on Facebook, had a big brand around it.
Sorry, where's your user base?
So back then, it was Middle East. It was
okay.
Tarnib game.
Okay, okay.
Exactly. So we had a lot of, let's call it, branding equity here, even though the tech was built out of the US. And we were asked to be on TV, and there was a lot of things that we did. So it had a big name here. So I think that helped with, I mean, it was very simple back then to tell people who we are here, right? The challenge was the business model.
Yeah,
but the brand who we are,
educating to do to the users. Like the game was known actually.
Exactly.
Yeah, I get it.
We were the largest, 4-player card game back then on mobile.
Cool. You also mentioned that. So you now, I mean, at the time your user base was in the Middle East. What about now? Like, how is it different?
It's all over the world, but majority is in the US.
What happened?
Ironically, I know where you're going to go with this, because like I know, and now we're shifting. Now we moved the company to the UAE, and then now the majority of the users in the US. Nothing happened. I mean, we still have entity in the US, entity in Brazil, and entity here. So I'd like to say we're just kind of trying to get the best of both worlds, and also from a tax structure, operational structure, collecting revenue here is more advantageous.
Yeah, but the users are in the US. But what happened? I mean, at the time there wasn't.
We still have Brazil, so most developments in Brazil as well. Being here also allowed us to tap all into the European market, so some advantages as well. And there's a lot of talent right above us in Europe within the 2-hour time zone of where we're at.
Definitely. From here, from the UAE.
From the UAE.
Yeah, definitely. But the question is, so why did your user base shift Like at the time you had to do.
We have multiple games. We have multiple games. No, we still have a massive user base in the Middle East. Sorry, we launched a new game, Spades Masters, and that's user base in the US.
Mm-hmm.
So our company is not one game only. Again, we have our own engine and we're deploying multiple games on it. And we have another game coming out that's going to be global. We have another game in the pipeline, also global. And then we have another game, more Canada. So each game has its own predetermined territory where we think it's going to be popular.
Okay, so you're catering for different audiences,
Exactly.
different demographics.
Exactly.
Okay, cool. You mentioned that whenever you go to Turkey, to London, to these events, there's a shift that happens in your head in terms of what you'd be pitching. I'm interested to learn or to hear from you what are the differences in these markets, like as opposed to Turkey and to London and to like Europe in general.
Yeah.
How do we compare, in your opinion? I mean, in the region, how do we compare as gaming businesses, and do we even compete?
Listen, okay, there's advantage and disadvantages, to be honest. There's an advantage of being here, right? You get the advantages of emerging markets, basically, when it comes to gaming. So there's a lot less competition, 100% for sure. VCs or investors willing to get into gaming, specifically focus on international plays, here being international. This is a perfect opportunity for you to be in front of them here. When you're fundraising back in the US, it's way more difficult. All your ratios, your metrics, your cost structures, your models, everything's a bit off than what you're used to. Ticket prices are just way higher there, which is another, maybe not a Middle East issue, maybe it's a global gaming thing, but you can find two studios building similar games with 5x difference in production costs. And you wonder what's going on. So being here is interesting because it kind of removes all that. But at the same time, when it comes back to your question about, I don't think one is easier or more difficult. There's cons and pros, in all honesty. However, there's way more supply of investors and VCs in Europe and in the US. Way more, right? So you're able to go out there and essentially sell your story a lot quicker and find a perfect fit or a good fit investor a lot faster. As long as, of course, you have all your metrics, you have your... Because see, VCs, that's one thing. And then VCs over there know what they're looking for.
They're focused on gaming.
They're focused on gaming. And not even gaming. Within gaming, the market is segmented into early stage, late stage, portfolio plays, whatnot. So they know what they want, even down to the genre, right? For example, some VCs or like some investors are, company are publishers only, right? Well, I don't think investors, but let's say specific type of developers, specific genre, some are, tech plays or infrastructure plays in gaming. So it's like a very focused thing. And if you check their boxes, you have a foot in the door. Here, VCs are a bit more general gaming. So now they're looking at console, they're looking at mobile, they're looking at a couple of different genres, looking at multiplayer, single player, and that I think makes it hard for them to have conviction once you pitch your story to them, because it's always going to be a new story.
Interesting. I'm happy you mentioned publishers, because actually I was having a conversation a couple of days ago with a friend of mine about the difference between like normal startups and gaming startups in general. Yeah. And it was hard for me to explain or to find the alternative of a publisher in the startup world. Like, you like you mentioned, a publisher could be an investor but might not be an investor at the same time. What is a publisher like for those who are watching from not from the gaming industry? What could be compared to a publisher in the normal world, like in the tech ecosystem?
So I think it's important to answer that question in different silos. So platform specific, right? So a mobile game publisher is a little bit different than your console publisher, a little bit different than your PC publisher. I'd like to say maybe, again, I don't have that much experience in console and PC, but I'd like to feel that they're more similar than a mobile game publisher. So mobile game publisher is very different. And I think it's because, a publisher's main role is to publish, which is basically mean to grow and scale your game. They invest marketing dollars or resources to grow your game. Now, I feel that the user acquisition story in mobile is extremely different than it is in PC on console. Yeah. So that lends their operations, even their finances, and the way they evaluate projects is extremely different. In mobile specifically, at the end of the day, they're looking at your cost per install, your CPI, and then your LTV, and essentially your return on ad spend. from their spend. So they know I'm going to spend $1, I'm going to make $2. And they want to see that equation. And then they factor in scalability in your team and marketability, a lot of different things. So that's your mobile publisher. So
They're
that's
essentially a marketing agency in the game space.
I don't want to say the word marketing agency, but yes, right? They're spending the dollars and they're taking a revenue share at some point. Now, where they start working with you in the development cycle is what sets them apart. So some publishers, like on the hyper casual part, will only invest their money after they have proven the metrics. So you build your game, you give it to them, they test it, they look at the numbers, and they make a decision, we will invest or not invest. And then you have, those are hyper casual games, but then you have some games like mid-core games or higher production value games. Those cost a lot of money to go build out. So some of these publishers might come in a bit earlier in the conceptualization phase of the game, or maybe even the prototype phase of the game. They can, every publisher is very different.
Yeah.
And then they partner up with you if they believe in the team, they believe in the market, and they believe you're going to do something well. And they support you, and they actually give you a budget for development. So every publisher is different, and it depends on the time. So over the past 5 years, the market's really shifted, from iApp monetization to ads monetization. Now we're going back to iApp monetization. Premium model back in the day, free to play forever. Now we're still free to play, but the mix is a bit different. So also depending on the timing, the publisher's role also has to adapt to those markets. And I think also there is a movement into self-publishing. And I don't have data to back this up, but I start recognizing smaller studios saying, heck, let's just raise our own little funding and then do what publishers are doing themselves, because the tools and the automation and the data is now all there. I can do everything myself. So without getting into too much details, I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, maybe like I mentioned that the publisher is like a marketing agency in the traditional, not traditional, but like in the tech ecosystem. But that marketing agency actually shares the revenues with you. So I think this is the closest thing to a publisher that we have in the normal world. So we talked about publishers, their role, how important they are. We've discussed also VCs, like investors, their role and how important they are. Now, what about talent? As if we compare to the other regions, in terms of talent, I know you mentioned that we're 2 hours away from talent across the region. How do we compare in the region in terms of talent with Europe, let's say, or the US, or even South America, or even Southeast Asia, in your opinion?
So naturally, we're a bit, I don't say the word behind, but we are a smaller community. So educational programs, access to training, etc., still a bit in the early stage of ecosystem building, if you will. So yes, in terms of you're a company trying to hire people, you're going to struggle to hire from here, right? And not only this, most of the talent that is going to be here are naturally going to be younger, more junior side of the scale. If you're looking for like serious talent with like 20 years under their belts, 15 years under their belt, obviously you're not going to find them here. So as a company starts growing, starting from an idea to professional studio, you're going to find yourself 100% hiring from abroad and moving them here.
To scale or to grow as a company.
To scale as a company.
But is it the quality of the talent, or is it like the experience of the talent?
I don't think it's the quality. I think the quality is very high here.
Yeah.
I think it's just the experience. And that's a great question. I'm glad you corrected me on this. The quality is high. It's just the experience. You're going to find yourself, at some point, I was telling my team, I'm like, guys, I feel like we're running a university, because we hire this very fresh young graduates, and then we're like teaching them all these things. And part of me is like, I'm a gaming company. I'm already super high risk. Why am I doing this stuff like the big guys like Ubisoft should be doing? Hey, go work at Ubisoft for 10 years.
Super dynamic environment. When you're having these guys. But this is how you grow like a company in the region where there's a small community of developers, and then there's not much experience under their belt. So I'm happy that we touched on the talent, on the publishers, and on the VCs.
Yeah.
What do you think we lack in the region in order to become like a global powerhouse or a development hub, as the countries here are aiming to be?
Yeah, it's a very open-ended question.
Yeah, I'm trying to understand your perspective on this. I have my own.
Yeah, I would love to hear your thoughts. However, if we're speaking government support as a big umbrella, I think if you look at historically, almost every region that has a profound gaming community, if you go back in history, there was some government involvement program at some point to accelerate this, or some interests at the government level, right? Because you have to lay the groundwork. You have to bring in the educational programs. Schools have to be interested. Nobody wants to take the risk. So you need like an entity such as a government to step in, cover that risk. So I think governments here are doing a great job in trying to enter that. So they're doing the right steps. Can they push a bit further? Of course. But so that's a good thing. And I think lots of this has to happen and continue to happen until the ecosystem reaches like a tipping point, if you will, where it can self-sustain itself. Because right now you're in this situation where you have talent coming in, but then you have attrition and they leave, coming in and they leave. So you're almost like this network effect where you have to continue growing your ecosystem until it becomes self-sustainable. You have a couple of unicorn companies here, a couple of like larger companies, such as like Peak Games out of Turkey, right? Just created the whole...
This is my question.
Yeah.
How to get a unicorn company from the region? How can we achieve that?
I mean, I have my own ideas on how to do that. I'd like to say that we could one day become a unicorn company, but I think it's, and I speak a lot to government officials about this, but at the end of the day, you have to balance the battlefield. You have to level the playing field in terms of us here versus Europe versus the US, or whatever region you want to pick. It can't be more difficult to me to operate a gaming studio here than it is to operate it in Europe. I'm using the word Europe just...
Is it more difficult?
It still is. It's a lot easier than it was, let's say, 3 years ago, but it's still more difficult. There's a lot of challenges. And by just adding this friction, I mean, gaming companies are already ultra risk. So you want to de-risk it as much as possible, support it as much as possible. I'm not just saying financially, but as all aspects as possible that the government can do. And then I think that's the minimum to like level the playing field. So now I'm not just competing with a studio out of, anywhere in Europe and having to worry about all these other things you're not worried about. So I think once that's fixed, now we can start building companies here.
Can you give me an example of these things that you worry about? That I'm genuinely interested to know. Like you're telling me, it's still harder. It's easier than it used to be, but it's still harder than to operate a studio here than in Europe.
Yeah.
What's harder?
Yeah. So there's a lot of different things. I'm across all different things. I mean, a simple one would be, let's say, raising debt. Right. Let's say I want to go raise debt. I'm in a stage of the company where I can take on some debt, help scale my games. You will not find anyone here to raise debt.
Definitely.
Number one. Number two, if you do find someone in Europe or in the US and raise debt, they're not going to be able to look at your financials or your banks over here. They don't understand, the operating system here, like your financial statements here and whatnot. They'll tell you, hey, we work with US entities only, or these entities, actually most of the ones I've spoken to. So luckily we have a US entity, so we use that to do all the legal contracts and agreements. And this is just, I guess, on the business side of things, more
structure.
Exactly. On the operational side of things, tools and talents and everything's just a bit more difficult. Experience is a bit more difficult. Access to resources is a bit more difficult. So there's just this friction like everywhere you go, right? Heck, moving money in and out of banking, like we're dealing with the dirham here, and then you want to like transfer money out. We have to deal with our own licensing and things here. There was no gaming license 4 years ago. So you're trying to do transactions. There's no so very small items like this, you're just pioneering everything. And you're going through a lot of what I call teething problems, being the first here. And, I could sit down and write you a very long list of things. None of them are showstoppers, right? None of them will stop you from starting your business. But I'm just dealing with this unnecessary burden.
And they pile up at some point.
And they start piling up. And you're like, what am I doing? I'm trying to build a game here, not worry about legals and contracts and finances and all these things. So, so I think that's something to keep in mind as well.
Interesting.
Even the big players, right? When you think of, and of course that problem is now fixed, but if you think of, there was a time back in the day where people were creating US entities to be able to work with Apple and
Yeah.
upload their game. Because if you create like a local entity, it's not in the drop down menu, right? There's no UAE in the drop down menu for Apple. Obviously, that completely changed. I'm talking about like 8-9 years ago. But I remember when we first started, we're like, okay, I'm glad we're in the US. So those are examples of like infrastructure things that make it a bit challenging in the region.
I feel that the infrastructure today is actually good here in the UAE.
Mm-hmm.
But in my opinion, the way I see things is, in order to get to have that unicorn, you have to publish games.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that we struggle to do here is to actually raise money, raise debt, raise UA money, raise funding, like normal funding, in order to push your games.
Yeah.
So instead we rely on publishers to push our games.
Yep.
Hence we will never, that's a bit dramatic, but we won't be able to publish ourselves. So we wouldn't be getting a unicorn. This is one of the things that I see. In terms of infra, I think we're in a good place. We're not like we're getting there. We're getting there. This is why I was trying to get there to see if you see the same not issue, but like the same perspective. Like if you have the same perspective as me, since